Audubon blurred the line between scientific inquiry and spiritual quest, and it became increasingly blurred in the drawings of his contemporaries, the great romantic artists of the 19th century. They went to the natural world in search of more than physical data to study and organise. They looked with a sense of wonder and asked themselves what it might mean to feel at one with nature. No painter travelled as restlessly through the landscape as that giant of British art, Joseph Mallord William Turner. Itinerant master of all things scenic, Turner covered thousands of miles and filled hundreds of sketchbooks in search of promising subject matter for his large oil paintings. The act of sketching was initially a means to an end, but it gradually became second nature to him. So much so, you sense he almost couldn't stop himself drawing his environment, sometimes even trying to capture the views he saw while still in transit. These loose forms were put down in a matter of seconds as he made his way to one of the British landscape's most dramatic settings, Stonehenge. In many ways, it's a model subject for Turner, and to wander round Stonehenge with him in mind is to try and comprehend what stirred in him as he prowled among its remains, sketchbook in hand. I think he was drawn to this place of ancient standing stones by a sense of fellow feeling with those who created it. As he grew older, Turner's own view of nature became increasingly primeval and fixated on the elements. I'm sure the monumental, time-defying solidity of Stonehenge moved him, but I think he was even more moved by its aura of mystery and ritual. And his thoughts turned naturally to the larger movements of the universe that envelops us all.
Gradually, Turner became less and less interested in topography and more engaged in a kind of trance-like state, a state almost of reverie with the essential aspects of nature. And he asked himself, how can I catch this? How can I catch just light and just colour on the hoof, on the run? And he turned away from conventional line drawing and he moved into watercolour.
Turner's watercolour sketchbooks aren't well known, too fragile to exhibit often, but they're among the most transcendently beautiful works of art ever created. They turn the idea of the sketch as the embryo of something else on its head. These radiant pictures are Turner's vision at its most essential, freed from line into light, through drawing with a brush instead of a pencil. They're like depictions of the world before the advent of objects. The usual subjects of 19th century art, cities, people, history, God and his heaven, had become irrelevant to him. Turner replaced them with the true eternal processes that shape nature, the flare and dissolution of light seeming to reflect the very patterns by which the universe itself was formed. Through it all runs a profound, honest sense of wonder and mystery. What does life mean? Turner doesn't know, but he watches the lights sparkle and fade. Landscape was in many respects the great subject of 19th century art. The English romantics looked at their surroundings, the fields and rivers, hills and trees, and found poetry there. But they also went to nature to find themselves. That's why one of the greatest of them all, John Constable, didn't just paint any landscape, but his landscape, rural Suffolk, where he was born and brought up.
Like many of the great draftsmen who've shown us something fundamentally new about the natural world and our place in it, Constable was self-taught. He was seeing things for the first time with his own eyes and working out how to draw and render them. He'd been educated at the Royal Academy schools in London, but he hadn't found it a pleasant experience. He'd been forced to study from the cast, and after life, what he wanted to do was to get back to nature. So he threw it in, and he came back to Suffolk, and he came to the landscape where he'd grown up, and he drew, and he drew, and he drew.
Constable was born here in 1776. What is now quaintly referred to as Constable Country was literally at the root of everything he drew and painted. The emotion he put into his work has been misread as nostalgia for a pre-industrial England forever green. But drawing his native landscape wasn't for Constable a sentimental activity. He was a pragmatist and a realist. Unlike Turner, he rarely composed epic symphonies of the elements and avoided lucrative commissions to paint the estates of wealthy patrons. Concentrating on this place was about getting to the reality of life as it was lived and as it was felt.
The world that Constable drew and painted wasn't some pastoral fantasy land. It was a real working industrial landscape. And the things that he chose to draw tell us a lot about his attitudes towards it. He drew the dry docks, he drew the weirs, he drew the canals, 19th century equivalents to construction sites and motorways. He didn't disguise the fact that this was a real place in the modern world. And I think that tells us about Constable's quest. He wanted to get to the heart of the place. He wanted to get at the truth.
But his realism was shot through with a sense of mystery. He said the art of seeing nature was as much to be acquired as the art of reading the Egyptian hieroglyphs. But what did those hieroglyphs mean?
Constable wrote that no 2 days are the same, no 2 hours are the same, no 2 leaves are the same. And whereas I think of Leonardo as the great student of the mechanics of the natural process, how does the root system of a tree work? How does the valve of the heart open and close? I think of Constable as a great philosopher of the entire natural process, which he sees as a kind of endless orchestra playing out a different form of shape, movement. He sees the whole thing, and you can sense this in his drawings. He's at least as interested in the wind that moves the tree as he is in the tree itself. He wants to paint the changeability of the world.
Constable's greatest achievement was to fold his own feelings into his depictions of nature. When he draws a tree, its limbs dancing in the wind, he creates a metaphor for the ever-changing world of human emotions. And those emotions can be pretty complicated and personal. In the early 1820s, when his wife was slowly dying of dreadful emphysema, he became positively obsessed with trying to capture effects of breeziness and airiness in a series of incredible drawings. It's as if he was trying to fill her lungs with air using the medium of art. His motto was, "Painting is another word for feeling." And I think the same's true of his drawings. Looking at them, there's so much feeling in them that it's very difficult to know what exactly you're looking at. You're certainly not just looking at something that Constable once had in front of his eyes. You're looking at his own responses, his own emotions mingled with that. And I think that's the whole point. What Constable's saying is that you can't separate yourself from the natural world that you inhabit. Jackson Pollock in the 1950s said, "I am nature," which is a pretty radical thing to say. But Constable said it first in his art, and it changed everything.